All right, and it looks like we're live. Hello, everyone. We're going to give everybody just about 30 more seconds to funnel on in. Looks like the attendees list is going up. My name is Bryce. I am the marketing lead over here at ViewPro. Actually, really quick, a couple of housekeeping items. So if you have any questions throughout this session, please feel free to put it in the Q&A or the chat section. I will personally reach out if it's something that I can answer. If it's something that's directed to one of our panelists today, I will be sure to direct your questions to them. Another thing we're doing today, just because we have such a huge turnout, which is awesome, is we'd like to get to know a little bit more about y'all. So we've actually put together a poll, and I'm going to go ahead and start that poll real quick. So if you look in the polls section of the Ring Central app here, you should be able to see the one called Large Poll. And we have a couple of questions just to get to know you a little bit better. We'd love to kind of hear who's coming in to the session, what they're getting out of it, and kind of where they're coming from in the world. So with that, today we're focusing on kind of the intersection of technology and zoning, and kind of its kind of ascent into your workflows as the years kind of go by and this technology gets better and better and better. So. With that, I'm going to go ahead and pass this off to Suhag Kansara, the founder of ViewPro. See, Suhag, are you there?
Yes, sir. Well, thank you, awesome. Bryce.
Yes, sir.
Well, first of all, good morning. Thank you all for taking the time. Just wanted to give a brief introduction about the speakers today, starting with me. I'm Suhag Kansara, founder and CEO at ViewPro. I have a bachelor's degree in architecture and a master's degree in urban planning from Texas A&M. With more than 20 years of industry experience coupled with Esri partnership, ViewPro has created software as a service mapping application that empowers city planners and decision makers with user-friendly automated GIS solutions. I'm excited to be accompanied by two of the industry's most admired professionals and certified planners. We have Jocelyn Gibson. She's a managing principal from the Cincinnati-based planning and zoning consulting company ZoneCo. She has public and private sector planning, zoning, community development, and commercial real estate experience. She's a co-founder and a past chair of the Midwestern chapter of the Congress for the New Urbanism. She was elected to the National CNU Board from 2021 to 2024. She believes in acting locally. She has been a trustee in her community council, board member of her local CDC, and a president of a local board of zoning appeals. And finally, we have Brad Keast, founder and CEO of enCodePlus. He's the visionary behind innovator product called enCodePlus, a pioneering software as a service platform specifically crafted for planners, zoning administrators, clerks, attorneys, and local government officials. With a distinguished 35-year career spanning roles in city government, council of government, and both national and international consulting firms, he brings extensive expertise to his mission of advancing planning and zoning practices through innovative technology solution. So with that, let's get the ball rolling. Let's see what you can expect today. So if you can go to the next slide. Can we go to the next slide, Brad, please?
There it is.
Okay. All right. So what you can expect today is basically we want to talk about the state of the technology in local government. Of course, we have so many options to choose from, so many urban planning challenges to solve. And basically, it is a puzzle that we are trying to attempt to solve. And we're going to have perspectives from two of the most leading zoning code writers, Brad and Jocelyn herself. We're going to talk about its link back to the technology when it comes to codification, or in terms of Esri's platform, where we're going to talk about digital zoning, one of the fundamental first step, or linking to the Esri's ecosystem, where unique software platforms such as ArcGIS Urban and City Engine are going to play a role. Of course, we're going to have some of the takeaway points for you all to consider. And without further ado, I would like to invite Brad Keast and kick off the webinar today.
Good morning, everyone. Pleased to be with you this morning. Glad we have such a terrific attendance. I would think this is a very valuable topic because we're seeing rapid increase in technology in the planning field. I think back when I first started in planning 35 years ago, I got out of school and hand wrote zoning ordinances and handed it to the secretary to type on a typewriter. So fast forward 3 decades, and here we are with tremendous opportunities before us with technology, and it's having more and more influence on what we do every day as planners and others within this profession. So obviously it affects many of us, kind of all of us, whether you're a planner, zoning administrator, or perhaps there's folks who serve on a planning commission or a board of appeals or other types of committees. Think about GIS in particular. I remember when I first started just beginning to use GIS, and again, fast forward a few decades, and here it's pretty much prevalent through every organization. So over the course, took 2 decades to really get to the point where it is a must-have solution for most planning departments and city and county organizations. I expect some of these other technologies will have a similar influence on what we do as they are continuing to grow and increase and become better and better solutions. Today, a few things that I see is there's a lot of information that's just not real publicly accessible. Of course, you can find, if you look real hard, assessor or appraisal data to get parcel related information, but there's not a whole lot about zoning information on an address related basis. We're going to show you an example of that. Increasingly, I'm starting to see more cities and counties that are posting on their website locations of where current development proposals exist, and you can see those applications, but it's not very prevalent today. There's a handful of places, mainly larger cities, that are doing that. And I think 3-dimensional mapping, we've all seen examples of this. We're going to see more today, but I think that's going to play a bigger and bigger role in what we do every single day. To this point, technology is increasing, but it hasn't really been viewed as one of the essential infrastructure. Of course, police and fire and water and sewer take precedence, but I think smart city technology is growing, and we're going to see that continue to become more prevalent in what we do. Obviously, we all, I think, understand that technology is important. We're still working in paper-based systems. Believe it or not, there are still many, perhaps some of you, that are working with paper-based, whether that's an Adobe PDF that you have to scroll through, or whether you're still working out of a binder. It makes it very slow to accomplish things in terms of making amendments. Many are relying on outside providers to handle zoning amendments and updates, and sometimes those can take weeks or months before they're active and available for those who are utilizing them. It really causes a lot of telephone calls and emails and visits to planning offices because there's not a lot of information that's available. We rely on our cell phones for pretty much everything else we do in our life, but we haven't got to the point yet where you can look up the zoning on a property, or you can see what may be happening when you drive by and see development activity or a rezoning sign on a property. So it's kind of hard to communicate to the public effectively today, but I think that is continuing to increase. Of course, a lot of departments, some places are better than others, but in some instances, they're very siloed. They interact and they talk, but they have different sets of data available. And some places there's not a lot of sharing of that data, and certainly putting all that data available out to the public. More and more, we're using data to make our day-to-day decisions and our recommendations to our commissions and councils, and having access to real-time data makes that a whole lot easier in terms of making those recommendations. And we can avoid human error with manual interpretations. There's lots and lots of benefits. Today, as we're doing zoning projects across the country, we've done over 250 ordinances for cities and counties across the country, and automating and streamlining processes and putting information together so that if you're reading a zoning ordinance and there's a reference to a design guideline or to an engineering standard, rather than having to go out and search the internet to find where that document may be, being able to hyperlink within and between documents to make that all simple, it makes it much easier for those who are using it. We're able to store and visualize zoning data in GIS. We're going to show you how we are dynamically integrating the text of the zoning ordinance with the zoning map. So as one changes, the other automatically changes. Things of that nature can dramatically help the work that we're doing all day, every day. What we're seeing is that the technology is widely varying from place to place. Those that are larger cities that may have more resources tend to have investments in zoning technology more so than others. But a lot of those who are in perhaps greatest need, where there's the most development happening on the rural edges or suburban areas, they may not have the resources to invest in technology. And a lot of times we see that it's really due to the techno savviness of a leader, whether it's a department head or somebody else that's bringing new technology to the organization. It's got to make sure that everybody's aware of the technologies that are available. They don't have to be expensive. They don't have to take a long time. They don't have to burden city staff. They can be turnkey and stand them up rather quickly. And there's many, many obstacles that we have. Multiple data sources. Those data sources are constantly changing from a variety of different sources, whether it's local, regional, state, federal, whatever that might be. And of course, different departments have different needs. And so sometimes that can stretch our resources thin. So we need to continue to work together. And just the pace and expense of emerging technology seems like they're constantly changing, so it's hard to keep up with the latest version. And a lot of times that's kind of prevents communities from making investment because they're not sure they're going to be able to stay up with the expenses over time. Looking at zoning ordinances, many of you probably experienced this, where you may have your ordinance either hosted with an outside vendor, that may be through the clerk's office or perhaps with your department. Sometimes they're separate. Oftentimes those are unfriendly. They indeed present the text of the code and you can scroll through them, but they're not very interactive. They're not too friendly in terms of introducing a technical document to those who may not use that every day. Or they're in a bunch of different PDFs where you can't search across them and you have to go into one and scroll forever. So we're going to show examples of different ways that zoning ordinances can be communicated to the public and much more friendly in how they're structured. So we're going to talk a little bit about current planning in terms of the everyday work that we do in our planning and zoning departments or community development departments. And then the second part of the presentation is really going to look at kind of some of the scenario planning or future planning that can be done with some of the GIS tools. I believe you should be able to see the Littleton, Colorado City Code and Charter. Are you able to see that on the screen? So
yes, we are.
somebody, yes?
Yes, sir.
So this is an example of an interactive website that presents their city code and charter. You can look at it a number of different ways in terms of clicking on a drop-down menu. And here you can either go to an individual title or article or chapter within a code, or you can go to different documents or most popular sections. So this is a rather simple view, but it's one way that we can make ordinances, particularly those that are complex or long, or they're maybe part of a city code. We can make them more easily to navigate within them. Here is another example. This is Menifee, California. And if you click on View, this is a navigator that is custom designed and built based upon the organization and structure of their development code and how it's being utilized, both by residents and laypersons, as well as by engineers, architects, and development applicants. Again, this was custom designed for this community. They chose to organize it around the districts and land uses, standards, and then administration and procedures. So you can navigate more easily and see, rather than a long scrolling table of contents, you can see the layout of the code, and you can also make tables and figures and things like that available. There are a number of tools that they have available on their site. I'll show you some examples of these, such as development calculators for parking and landscaping, development yield, affordable housing. There's a whole range of different quantifiable standards that can be created. I'll show you an example of a land use lookup tool to help people to figure out what land uses are permitted where and what's required. There's different ways that you can view the code in a user-friendly way, and then having an interactive zoning map. This is yet another example of a what's called a document gallery. In this particular example, this community in Belmont, North Carolina, they not only have their land development standards, but they also have their code of ordinances, comp plan, park plan, pedestrian plan, and a number of other documents all together in one place, as well as all their different maps. So if you click on the development standards, you get a zoning navigator that again breaks it out. They chose to do it on building standards, district standards, and use standards. Or you can also scroll through and look at some of the individual chapters. And then you can click into any one of those chapters and effectively scroll through. There's things like pop-up definitions, hyperlinks within the document and between the document, having graphics embedded within the document so that they're presentable and clear and articulate, and they are updatable. So they're easy to swap out and bring in new graphics. This is an example of how a development code can be structured. First of all, has a style sheet so that it's styled or branded to the locale. There's an auto-generated table of contents at the top of every article and chapter, so you can quickly navigate your way to sections within that article. The color-coded icons here are basically links to the different chapters, and it's called a content assembler. So essentially, rather than having to know a whole 300 or 400 or 500-page code, it will assemble the provisions that relate to that individual district. So you don't have to know the whole code. It may put together 20 or 30 pages of the uses, the dimensional standards, sign standards, parking standards, so forth and so on, without having to bother yourself with picking through a long code. So that's very, very popular. And then having lots of tables, again, pop-up definitions and things of that nature. Littleton has a very graphic-oriented code. So again, all of these graphics reside within the back end. They can be swapped out easily. As you scroll through here, you can have lots of graphics in line that correspond to the individual dimensional standards. So this can all be printed. It can be exported to Microsoft Word or PDF, and it's much more presentable, particularly for zoning land development regulations that tend to have more tables and graphics, such as form-based codes or design guidelines. So it's important that you have a system that is able to adequately display those. I mentioned earlier the calculators. This is an example, again, from Littleton, Colorado, where we can click on landscaping and open space. There are inputs, so you can select an individual district and then put in the quantities that are asked for: linear street frontage, lot area, street facing building facade, and then calculate, and it'll basically explain how many deciduous trees are required, understory plantings, minimum open space requirements, common open space landscaping, so forth and so on. So these development calculators are calibrated for each community specifically, and again, can include buffer yards, parking, site capacity, fee schedules. Any quantifiable standard that is part of your development standards can be built out as a development calculator. One other feature is a land use lookup tool that I explained earlier. This allows you to either use drop-down menus, which essentially corresponds to a land use matrix, or you can just simply start typing of use, and it will identify where that use is permitted by right or permitted conditionally. And then you can click on a map, and it will effectively map the location of where that land use can be permitted. When I talked earlier about 3D zoning maps and building digital twins, increasingly we're seeing more and more interest and requests in this. This is an example, again, from Littleton, Colorado, where we can turn on 3D buildings. And then if we use our right mouse key, we can go into 3D. We're able to actually show all of the vegetation as well. And you notice many of these buildings have accurate roof lines. This community decided to have more detail in their buildings downtown on a couple of the corridors that they're seeing redevelopment pressures. What this is doing is if you click on any one of these lots, I'll just choose a residential lot here, it will display a Google Street View. It will allow you to see all of the standards that apply to that lot. So you can click and access directly to the development code, the matrix, parking standards, sign standards, outdoor lighting, so forth. It is bringing through all of the parcel data from appraisal or assessment district, showing parcel ID, area ownership, but it can also pull through any other parcel related data that is maintained by the community, including whether they're within a HOA area or within a certain special district or council ward or whatever that might be. At the same time, it will reach out and read dynamically from the development code and identify all of the setbacks that are permitted, as well as all of the land uses. And this one actually has an added feature of accessory dwelling units of whether or not they are permitted on this lot, what type is permitted, and then having access to their standards as well. So this is just showing you a few examples of some cities and counties around the country that are utilizing technology, both for their internal workings of being able to communicate effectively to their planning commission or the council developments that are proposed. It's highly efficient in terms of amending and updating the ordinance by being able to make these changes themselves and to publish them straight to the web, as well as to codify them. So that concludes my remarks. I will pass the presentation on.
Awesome. Thank you, Brett. Can you confirm if you can still see my slide okay? And hear me okay?
Yes, sir, we can.
Awesome. Thank you. Appreciate that. Well, moving on to the theme for GIS and more current planning related tools, I just wanted to take a little step back and kind of go back to the point where how overwhelming this experience can be for many of the city and local government officials. Now take a moment and digest this. And now we know that these are all Esri related tools, but did you know that the ArcGIS as an ecosystem has more than 1,000 various different geoprocessing tools, more than 100 spatial analytical tools, and hundreds of product releases each year. It is such a fast-moving target that today more than 73% of the local government organizations are still using the older version of the desktop software, and one of them is set to be expired by July 2025. You with me? Now, all these tools are part of the larger ecosystem, but they're all interlinked very heavily, and they also connect to outside software platforms. We are showing a few outside platform providers that are directly connected to planning and zoning workflow. Now, if you really think it out loud, I can relate Esri's product offerings with O'Reilly Auto Part Company. I'm just kind of loosely comparing them. O'Reilly has thousands of various auto parts, and if you know which part goes where, in which order, and how to configure it, one can build an engine or even a full-size car themselves. However, if you don't configure it correctly, then you could meet with unmatched consequences. The same way, Esri's ecosystem is strong and robust. It is easy to use if you have a full understanding of how each of these tools are interlinked, configured, and be used in a specific order, then they can be fully leveraged to get the desired outcome. But the big question is, us as planners do not have enough time to deal with on a daily basis. We don't have enough flexibility, technology know-how, or even financial and technical resources to fully comprehend the true scope of this amazing soup. So what I'm going to try to do is simplify this logic further and kind of demonstrate a couple of features expansion in GIS so you can start connecting the dots that technology doesn't need to be overwhelming, but it could be an extremely easy experience. So let me go here and put another window. Give me 1 second. Okay, let me know if you're able to see my screen.
Yes, sir. We can see the zoning portal.
Awesome. Well, this is city of Littleton, Colorado. As Brad was talking about it, this city has leveraged technology probably to the fullest, and I think it's a great example to demonstrate. I'm going to give you a real-world case study or example where a city staff has a meeting with a potential developer who wants to build, let's say, an office building 8,000 square feet or higher. So as a land use calculator, we can type in the office and we get to see where it is permitted by right. And when you click view and map, it will actually bring back to the map portal and give you a filtered view of all the district that satisfy a few prime categories, such as it has to be an office use, it has to be 8,000 square feet, and it is permitted by right. It is also confirming that all the districts are matched, meaning the database between GIS and the actual codification where the zoning is hosted, they all are matching, giving you a further confidence that this indeed is the right information. And now when you go in here, we get to see the filtered view of all those districts. Now, as a second point, let's say a developer came up with few addresses that they have identified as potential sites. So we built a geocoding tool, which can be very cumbersome, where you can simply point to that particular Excel spreadsheet and you simply double click on it. And all those potential sites that are evaluating are available for viewing along with the filtered view of the districts. Now we can click on each one of them individually and see where they fall, but clearly there are only 2 areas or locations they kind of satisfy the requirement set by the land use matrix. Now if you can get closer to one of them, we can click on that parcel, and obviously we get to see what it looks like on the ground, which is nothing but a 7-Eleven with a gas station. We know what district it falls under, but the unique thing we have done is we have exactly identified what sort of regulations for this particular parcel based on the underlying zoning ordinance is applicable. So for instance, if you are care about the sign types and standards, it will directly take you to sign types and standards, so on and so forth. Of course, we know the ownership. Of course, we know the ADU information. Of course, this is a commercial, so it's not applicable. But this is where we start differentiating ourselves, where the setback standards is, which is typically buried deep within the regulations with a lot of chapters and sub-chapters. We bring that to life, even with including detailed notes, and allow you to go to those other areas to make the more informed decision. And just like that, you can create a detailed parcel summary, meaning within about a couple of clicks, a developer's conversation about, I want to build such and such office space, we are able to narrow down what those sites are and what it takes to build on it. As if this was not enough, can we take this to the next level, because we have a detailed understanding of the land use matrix, all the regulations and the setback standards. We decided to kind of take it to the next level by creating a potential build form. Now let's dig deeper. How are we getting all this information? So we analyze that there are so many building typology. This particular project is so detailed with the different typology. There are different standards, different setbacks for each of those building typologies. So office could be 0 to 15. Let's just say we make it to 15, right? And it will automatically respond to you. And so is all the sides. Let's make it 8, right? For the rear, let's make it to, let's just for the reference, we make it to 25, and the height could be 80 to 91 feet. Let's just put somewhere in between to 85, right? Just to kind of get the ball rolling. As the institutional knowledge with the domain knowledge, you may decide that the side could be treated as the rear, and you will notice that all the stats are also changing at the same time, giving you a clear understanding of the true potential of that. Now we have all of a sudden, from where we started, now we exactly know what it may look like when it's all full done. Of course, the actual build form can be a little bit different when the detailed architectural plans are done, but for the layman, for the non-planners, or people who can't visualize information in 3D, now have a clear understanding. If that was not enough, we decided to leverage Azure's ecosystem and say, you know what, let's just create what's the real view shed looks like. So we can click on it and we get to see the different view shed. We can even see the shadow cast, and see which are the areas will remain in majority part of the day, what part of the building will remain in shadow. We can do a line of sight analysis to see if any neighbor's privacy can be violated because of the extra height, so the planners can make a more informed decision, right? Or we can just see whether the shadow is going to play a role here or not. Once you like what you see, all you gotta do is create a PDF report, and now developer in less than 5 minutes of conversation can go home with actual tangible information on which they can make an informed decision. The same process from the city side can take up to a few days to a few weeks depending on their workload. And that's exactly what we're trying to say, that the technology is meant to help you, not overburden you, and the tools had to be extremely simple to use. Now moving on to more long-range planning, which comes to scenario planning initiative. This is also an example of City of Littleton, Colorado, as you can probably relate. In 2020, Brett Keefton of Kennedy's Collaborative put together the new Unified Land Use Development Code, was adopted in 2022, and we went through the whole exercise of building various different scenarios. And one of the idea of the comprehensive plan that were being rewritten is to introduce more affordable housing units, meaning all the commercial district had to be converted into a mixed use. So we wanted to test various different theories out to see a site that they wanted to build can accommodate the real world development pressure. So this is an existing site, which is a regional transit agency, has a large parking lot split into two parts. There's a historical regional transit station that they wanted to conserve, but the goal was to build and add more density and creating more like a growth center here. So we started experimenting to see what it takes to bring in all those existing parking that is being lost and add additional parking for the new dwelling units that we are developing. You could see all the different space use metrics. We can start capturing the parking, open space requirement, dwelling units, and you can clearly see that we are way too short of the real expectation. So we started kind of moving the ball forward and creating new experiments, because you can create as many scenarios as you need. And now we get to see that the parking scenario is been addressed very well. We created this donut style parking garage and added all the single bedroom, two bedroom, multifamily units. We added some retail, commercial with missing middle housing. And now it is starting to make sense. We started adding a new development where a community college who wanted to leverage more like an artist community. So we wanted to bring in those studios and those townhome apartments and still able to manage all those requirements that are required by the new housing ordinance. And just like that, we ended up creating a final scenario that not only respects all the current zoning ordinances in terms of parking, open space, space use matrix, number of jobs, and accessibility, and by also conserving all the current or existing environmental and historical context that they wanted to conserve. So just like that, through ArcGIS Urban, we were able to develop a kind of a story that was very difficult to tell. So ArcGIS Urban really helped play a pivotal role into it. Let me share and change my screen one more time. Okay. And I'm going to, okay, all right. So let me go, we already went through this. I'm just gonna quickly go through it. We talked about the scenario plan here for City of Littleton, Colorado. But this is what I wanted to showcase. Once we implemented this scenario plan for this particular site, we were able to demonstrate on the table below where the current zoning prior to implementing this new housing related incentives, the parking and the open space requirement were going to miserably fail. And through scenario planning exercise, we were able to demonstrate and prove that not only we can adhere to all the new zoning standard, but we can actually develop a real-world development scenario where we are introducing more density, more retail space, and also additional multifamily dwelling units. So a few takeaway points in both current and long-range planning tools. There are a lot of benefits. In the GeoZone application that we demonstrated earlier, it is more of a one-step mapping application that consolidates all the data layers that planners need to make informed decisions. It requires minimal learning of GIS tools, or in other words, doesn't need to be super well-versed in any kind of technology per se. It just click on a button, it tends to do the job for you. More importantly, the young planner with no prior experience for the city can perform at the same intensity as a staff with 10+ years of experience. So in other words, all the planning domain knowledge is weaved into the tool that read the regulations, or let me rephrase, the dynamic zoning regulations, because they change all the time. So the planning staff efficiency is increased exponentially, resulting in time and significant cost savings. On the ArcGIS Urban or the Esri ecosystem of the things, we can check code amendments and see its feasibility before putting them into action, run a comparative analysis between old and new zoning codes with the help of development scenarios. We can better handle development impacts thanks to those spatial analytical tools. It's a great communication tool to the non-planning city staff, stakeholders, and citizens. And last and not the least, it helps you truly know before you build. Now, planners don't have to wait an eternity to see the economic feasibility of their planning vision. One can test them out and see it for real long before putting them into action. Now, continue the conversation. I would like to now invite Jocelyn Gibson.
Great. Thank you, Suhag. My name is Jocelyn Gibson. I work for a firm called ZoneCo. We are a zoning consultancy based in the Midwest. We have a sister law firm with land use attorneys and real estate attorneys. We often say that we exist at the intersection of law, planning, and design. And our firm focuses pretty much exclusively on zoning code audits and zoning code updates. So the way my firm utilizes technology is, so my colleagues on this presentation, Suhag and Brett, they have sort of very impressive platforms that have the ability to leverage a lot of data and to integrate it and do some really amazing things with it. My firm doesn't possess those in-house. We often partner with firms that have those capabilities. We often also work with communities that will not in the foreseeable future have access to those types of platforms. So communities that are really trying to leverage data the best they can with the tools they have to work with. So speaking to that scenario today a little bit more. And so my background personally, I started my career working for the city of Cincinnati as a city planner. I was the staff person that was in charge of a lot of data fulfillment requests, both for the public and interdepartmentally. For a short time before I left, I was the city's delegate to the new open data program that was being run out of the city manager's office. From there, I moved to working for the global real estate firm CBRE, where I was an analyst. I worked with location analytics, business portfolio assessments, which include location decisions, and then also zoning assessments for some clients. So that's a little bit about my background. Next slide, Suhag. So we're in the absence of some of these platforms, breaking the utilization of technology and data into 3 parts, just to make it easy to understand and use it to the greatest level of effectiveness. So using it for understanding your context. So when you're thinking about zoning amendments, zoning rewrite, zoning update, utilizing data and the integration of data and the platforms you have available to understand the context that you're working with, and to better inform decisions. This could be part, ideally this would be part of the long-range planning process, that some of these analytic exercises will be part of the long-range planning, which will tee up a zoning code rewrite with as much information as possible. So that's the first part or bucket. The second is to support decision-making and guide the process. So you do have excellent platforms like the one Suhag was showing you today, but you also have just renderings that you can do to demonstrate real-world scenarios that could show what zoning standards could produce, or to utilize that in a sort of visual preference survey kind of manner. So guiding the decision-making process in real time and communicating the rationale behind zoning reform. And then evaluation and monitoring. And I do think that this is a segment of our field that we can all work on, is sort of when we have zoning amendments that are informed by a long-range planning process, how are we evaluating and monitoring the outcomes of the regulatory changes that we're making? And are we following up regularly to see what the, if we're accomplishing the things we intended to accomplish, or maybe there are some unintended consequences from some of these reforms. So next slide, Suhag. So jumping into sort of understanding the context for decision making. So my colleagues that spoke before me and talked about a lot of cities moving to open data programs. I think this is really excellent. Even if your city does not have a sort of sophisticated integration of your city data with GIS data, so you can see it, you know, the location of your data. You know, there are still pieces of data that you could work with through this process. And so things like permits issued, certificates of occupancies, value of improvements, these things can really give you insights into growth clusters, emerging corridors, where investment is going, and maybe the types of uses that are maybe not well accommodated within your zoning code. The use list can be really critical. Maybe there's new and novel uses that aren't being effectively accommodated, and through analysis of these types of permits, you can see where that's happening. So maybe you have a lot of life sciences going in, but you don't have an effective industrial category for that use. So you know, so administration becomes challenging. Things like that. Maybe you don't have a category for mobile vendors, and so that's being administered through a different facet. So these types, and the value of improvements too, it can really show you the scale of investment happening where, and also potentially if there's a lot of investment happening sort of maybe in residential sectors in certain zoning districts where people may be pushed out, and where maybe you need to write in incentives to mitigate some sort of gentrification or displacement that's happening. So these are the types of data pieces, how they can inform your code update, the age of housing units, and variances received, what the variances are for. So that can be really insightful into sort of variances are consistently requested for parking, given area of town, they're always granted. This might indicate a heavy hand on parking minimums. That's just an easy scenario we're sort of all familiar with. Use variances, which I think are less frequent in a lot of communities, but they can sort of point you to the types of uses that are not being effectively accommodated within your code. So next slide. So understanding the context for decision making. So again, utilizing GIS data, it's fairly simple. You know, most communities, you have the lot data. You can look at average lot sizes, median lot sizes. Sometimes you have some, you know, in a given zoning district, you might have a few very large lots which skew the data. So looking at those figures and kind of comparing them and understanding how they compare to what's in the code existing and where you're creating practical difficulties with minimum lot sizes as an example. You can also look at sort of the orthogonal, or how closely a lot approximates a rectangle, and sort of understand where you've got a lot of irregular lots in a given zoning district, so the rate of it, irregular lots that might exist. And so this is a little harder. Setbacks, from what I understand, a lot of communities don't have a layer for the building footprint on the lot. So it can be a little different, maybe a little more of a manual exercise, but you can look at the way setbacks are comparing to what is written in your code to inform what the changes you're going to be making. I will note, I do have some friends who do not, within their current employment, have access to Esri software. So there are free tools that you can utilize, QGIS, GrassGIS. I'm not very familiar with them, but apparently there's plugins and data sets that you can leverage to do some of your own analytics if you do not have access to some of these licenses that can be a little bit expensive at times. So I'm not super familiar with those, but it's something to potentially look into. Next slide. Understanding the context with environmental factors. So there are some environmental factors you can assess before going into a code update. Uses and intensity within floodplains if you're doing sort of growth planning through your comp planning process, and then that's carrying into some of your zoning amendments, maybe floodplains, and sort of, I think they're seeing we're seeing maybe more intensity of flooding more frequently. That is where not steering growth in those places, that can inform your code update. Tree canopy and coverage, which might inform tree preservation standards, tree replacement, ensure potentially native trees planted so they're hardier. Impervious surface coverage, where that might be excessive, and also not the best and highest use, also not environmentally friendly. Mapping groceries and food deserts, if that's if that's data that you have access to. Some communities, I was looking at Baltimore, they have CSA data loaded into there in addition to grocery stores. And then just looking from sort of an environmental justice standpoint, looking at where you've got residential areas in close proximity to industrial uses. I lived in Cincinnati for a long time in a neighborhood where it was historically where you lived next to where you worked, but that unfortunately was a lot of the heaviest industrial zone next to some actually single family zones, and sort of there's a need for some transition zones in there. And I always try to recommend this platform, the Sustainable Development Code, which is sustainablecitycode.org, I believe, or .com. I've got it written down. Anyways, Sustainable Development Code is an excellent resource. And talking about planning in, technology and planning, it gives you examples and explanations and code, points you to code language for technologies and planning and the way that you can write that language in your zoning code. So for district energy systems or solar arrays or green infrastructure. So it's a really excellent resource for writing that language and applying it in your zoning code update. So I recommend that to everybody, Sustainable Development Code. Look it up. And it looks like it is sustainablecitycode.org. So that is also building the context understanding for your code update. Next slide, Suha. So it can support decision making in real time. And like I said, Suhag's platform is excellent on this front. And it, understanding the repercussions of the language that you're writing. And you can also do this with just regular renderings, even with hand drawings, and help the community. It's also sort of helping them vision what could be, and also, like I said, visual preference surveys, gauging what type of outcome they're comfortable with. And then also to support decision making, when you have this data integration, you can, and you're proposing reforms in the zoning code, you can provide an understanding in real time of sort of what that so it just to help out the process. So, but I am going to hand it back off to Suhag on this front. He's got a couple more slides to illustrate this. Next slide. So post project evaluation. So again, when you've got access to permit information, certificates, occupancies, business license by geography, you can assess whether the changes have the desired effect. You can assess and even couple this with your economic development data and sort of where incentives were effective or where they might be additionally needed and didn't have the desired effect. So new housing units by zoning district. If some of your zoning reforms are housing based, obviously you can use this data to assess the impact at a 5 or 10 year interval. The composition of new housing units. So where you might have tried to incentivize multi-unit housing, but instead it was just large single family homes built instead, you sort of have access to that information, understanding you can tweak your policy approach. So these are, there's lots, I think that there's, people that are really into data and that is their prime focus would be able to structure sort of these post-project evaluations it really effectively. I think data isn't what I do all day, every day, but there's a lot of resources online to sort of understand these things better. There is some resources actually from APA, Big Data in Planning, and the 2023 trend reports are things you can access to sort of understanding leveraging data to the greatest degree. Next slide. So we talked a lot about the integration of data and mapping, and then to sort of leverage as much information as you can to inform zoning decisions. Also, when you've got applications for permits, get as much data as you can while you're there. So you know, like we talked about, the value of improvements can give you a lot of data, but things like if you are regulating mobile food vendors through your zoning code and you've got a new permitting system for them, you can understand better where they're operating, what days of the week they're operating, and that can kind of in turn inform your zoning updates. So design the inputs of what, you know, when you've got the applicants there to get the information from them while you can, thinking through what you want your outputs to be and what how you want that information to inform your decision making moving forward. So, you know, I spoke to one planning director that worked in 2 large major metros and talked about how integration of data in one community analysis might take days, where it was not integrated in the second community he went to. It might take his staff weeks to do the same analysis. So, you know, really focusing on a data forward approach can really guide decision making, and having the data integrated up front obviously saves us time later. And then more surgical and strategic understanding of how zoning should be revised. So like I said, Suhag is gonna jump back in and talk about sort of talk again about how some of these tools can help us understand the context for zoning and sort of real world outcomes, like sort of in real time. So I'm just going to hand it back to Suhag to have a presentation for a couple more slides.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Appreciate that. Just to respect time, I just want to make sure that there's the audio here, right? Give me 1 second.
We can hear you.
Okay. So I just want to piggyback on what Jocelyn was saying earlier. We just finished a project recently for a comprehensive plan where one of the tasks was to rewrite zoning ordinances as a part of the larger planning strategy. And what we did was, through a suitability analysis, we came up with some growth center, but we wanted to experiment some really cool ideas using City Engine, where we put all of those ideas of what it takes to build a proper growth kind of a growth center. We wanted to apply our various different ideas. So in this particular instance, let me just go back a few seconds. So this is where there was an island in the middle of a major intersection. So what we did was we built a CGA rule to be able to experiment where what happens if we close off those roads and create some more parks and open spaces and reroute the traffic. We had a couple of options. We wanted to infuse more density and also evaluate how it's going to impact compared to its neighbors. And we were able to quickly check its feasibility right there just by changing various different parameters. The reason I'm showcasing this to you, because City Engine, however, it might be an acquired skill, once integrated properly, can give you unbelievable control on how quickly we can turn things around and create various different scenarios. In the next particular video, let me just fast forward just a little bit so I can show you a little bit more. This one was a unique area because this was a large growth center, but we wanted to see at the end of the growth center, when it meets all the low density residential development, how can we control so that there are not large buildings next to a smaller residential. So we introduced that missing middle housing building typology, and in City Engine allows us to infuse those building typology in such a way that we can experiment, see the density, see the height, do the spatial analysis, and the density can be really high in the middle of the growth center. I think one of those quick turnaround ideas. I know we are pushing against the time, and I want to leave some more time for Q&A. I just wanted to give you a quick understanding. What you're seeing on the top left is the suitability analysis, a least appreciated feature from urban. Be mindful, if you have a large number of parcels, sometimes it tends to break. On the top right, we have a development review process. We can have multi-departmental workflow come into one platform using ArcGIS Urban. Lower left is the building scenario. We went through it quite comprehensively with City of Littleton. And the right side, what you see is the visualization. We can take the output from City Engine. We can take output from ArcGIS Urban, taking to Unity or Unreal Gaming Engine or Twinmotion to be able to create some phenomenal visualization. I just want to quickly touch base and just tell you that the journey may start in AutoCAD, your SketchUp in Architect's office. how it comes through the Esri ecosystem and how it goes out of the Esri ecosystem requires a little bit of a know-how when you're trying to deal with such large amount of data sets. Very simple. Take a moment to digest it. We may have 50, 100 tools to choose from, but sometimes handful tools can do a lot of great things. And whatever example that we showcased to you earlier is actually using those handful tools. It doesn't need to be too complicated. And that's some of my concluding remarks. I want to bring in Brett and Jocelyn and kind of have these final word and what their take on technology on the changing scenario with the city and local government context. Back to you, Jocelyn and Brett.
Well, I noticed as I was scrolling through some of the questions that, of course, there's a lot of questions about price. And I think it's important to know that some of these things that we're showing here, one would think that, you know, somebody has spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to accomplish. Quite the contrary. A lot of these things can be accomplished with, you know, a few $1,000s, less than $10,000 in some cases. They really are on a menu system, so it depends on what features are selected. And Littleton, for instance, from start to finish, that was basically built over the course of 5 years. So it was spread over, you know, different budget years. So it can be done in phases. A lot of these things are built so they're turnkey, so they don't place a lot of burden on staff and staff time. We know that's at a premium. Y'all have day jobs, and so taking on, you know, technology implementation can be, one would think, time consuming, but it doesn't have to be. And again, that small to moderate level investment can still have a transformational impact in you being able to do your job more efficiently, better, being able to communicate things better to the public or to elected or appointed officials, but also for the citizens to basically help them in understanding what can be, you know, technical and confusing, and try to make it as simple as possible. So please don't go away with the idea that, you know, this is kind of beyond your community's means to accomplish. I think it can be accomplished and, you know, could be added upon over time.
Sure. And, you know, I think we've got lots of notes here about begin with the end in mind. You know, I think where, you know, a code update is coming, or you know that your community zoning code is in need of overhaul, I think starting that data collection now, and like we talked about, when you have an interface where you can collect data, even if it is in the most rudimentary form, you know, keeping a spreadsheet, you know, from permit applications, just starting to build that out and just sort of building the data that you have access to, I think. And then, you know, it's not a difficult thing to geocode. I'm not nearly as proficient in GIS as my colleagues here on this call, but you know, it's not difficult to geocode once you have the data. So starting to think about that now, a few years out, and really having the ability to surgically and sort of responsively update your zoning code as best you can.
Awesome.
Well, one thing that I did not mention earlier is that these tools can also be used while you are drafting a comprehensive plan or an area plan or zoning ordinance. So there is a admin portal that is password protected that may be used to help facilitate the drafting process of a zoning ordinance, whereby you can have multiple people drafting simultaneously. You can be working collaboratively with questions and answers and track changes. You can actually publish interim drafts to the web and receive public comments. So this is a tool that, from a development code perspective, that's not only, you know, just kind of stood up after the fact. It can be used very effectively and efficiently in, you know, drafting or facilitating a plan process of some sort.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everyone. I think there are some very interesting Q&A, and we are hitting the end of the hour. However, we would like to stick around for a few more minutes if some of you are, and address some of the Q&A. But if we can't get to all those questions, this is our contact information. Please feel free to reach out. We will be putting together the recording of the presentation, and hopefully some of the Q&A, we can answer them through an email in the next couple of days. But thank you all for joining. We greatly appreciate you taking the time. This is 1CM credit certified presentation, so please make sure you do what you need to do to claim that. But Brett, Justin, if you can stick around for a few more minutes, maybe we can go over a couple of questions, a few of them, if you can.
Sure.
Sure. Awesome. Well, yes, the Q&A section is completely full. I don't think we're going to have time to kind of get to this complete volume, but I think there's a few that could be really good conversations. One of them coming from David. As a code consultant who does not provide an online platform as outlined by Brett, what can we do during the code writing process to ensure our work best integrates with this system? Our deliverables are typically in Word or InDesign files. Can cost or complexity be reduced if we prepare deliverables in a more compatible manner, so that tables, et cetera, are not completely recreated? Or is that inevitable or expected during your process? Is there anything we could do or should consider earlier in our process?
Well, absolutely. First of all, enCodePlus offers partnerships. So the company has partnered with consultants through the process to help prepare it in a web-based, ready-to-publish format. One of the things in our work, the parent company of enCodePlus is Kindred Keys Collaborative. The work that we do in drafting zoning and land development regulations, of course, the code may be organized and structured much differently if it is intended to be used in a digital manner as opposed to a PDF or a paper-based. We can utilize, hyperlinks and cross-references and things like that makes the document a lot more navigable and easy to use. So what we've found out from also being in the place where we were drafting in InDesign or in Microsoft Word is that we've discovered that we organize our documents much differently when we're making them for an online presentation. So I would just say reach out to us. You have the contact information there, and we're happy to help you any way we can.
Awesome. There were a couple of questions that I saw about licensing agreements with Esri, particularly ArcGIS Urban and City Engine. Of course, you're more than happy to help you out, but as a cities and local government, you have specific pricing. You might have other Esri products that you may have purchased that may qualify for some huge discounts. So if you want to know something specific in your context, I would highly recommend that you reach out to your local Esri license or account manager. If you are not aware of where to start, just shoot me an email and I'll be happy to put you in touch with it. But in general, if you don't qualify for any other discounts that Esri is offering, I think ArcGIS Urban and City Engine is a combined licensing, which is about $4,000 a seat. But again, this could change dramatically if you have an enterprise agreement in place.
Nice. One question I did want to get to real quick has to do kind of with the reaction of the public to some of these new tools. So the question is, have cities like Littleton experienced any NIMBY reactions when developments can be visualized to this degree, including shadows like you were showing? I work in affordable housing. This seems like a good tool for developers, but I wonder how neighbors react to the 3D demonstration of the future development. Yeah, what's y'all's take on that?
Brett, feel free to chime in. Based on my interaction with the city staff, of course, there's a round of public engagement that has gone through, and many of the residents have seen it. So far, it has been kind of a satisfactory experience in our professional opinion. We haven't seen such a negative reaction. In fact, there is a sense of sort of appreciation to be able to fully visualize the full, I would say, the effect of the new development it may take. And in many of the cases, many of their concerns were addressed using those special analytical tool. But Brad, you have been working with the city staff for quite a long time. I think your feedback could be even more helpful here.
Yeah, the development potential tool that Suhag was displaying, that's probably more effectively used internally as staff is evaluating a development proposal, or perhaps in a pre-app conference when you're meeting with the developer and you're able to help visualize and understand a little bit more about what they're proposing, the scale of what they're proposing. You'd be able to kind of give them some good feedback on where staff or the commission or council or board might have concern relative to its transition to neighbors or whatever that might be. Where we used it very effectively in Littleton was their historic downtown, which they're very protective of. And we identified all the districts and building types. What we did was we modeled the downtown, and then where there were infill tracks, we were able to build SketchUp models and import them so we can show how building types and its placement on the lot and its scale, how that can work within the context. And we also used it very effectively. They were very sensitive to height. So we were able to show proposals and some of the different districts within the downtown, different heights, and we can show them perspectives of, whether or not that building could be seen from some of the surrounding neighborhoods by using the view tool. I'm not sure, Suhag, I don't recall if you showed that earlier, but that is a very effective way to kind of help neighbors get on board by showing them in 3D. Certainly with the council, you can read a code and look at a table and see the numbers for heights and setbacks and building areas and all these floor areas, all these types of things. But, most people can't visualize what that actually means. So having a tool like this is hugely helpful to convey that. And in this case, it helped us make decisions together with the commission and council so that we could get the regulations adopted. So again, I think it's how you utilize the tool, which tools you use for which audiences you're trying to convince.
Awesome. Well, I want to say that thank you for taking the poll as well. Many of you decided to provide your valuable feedback. We greatly appreciate it. Again, we will be sending the PowerPoint slides and the recording in a couple of days. Allow us to digest all the questions that were asked. It's impossible to get through all of them, but we'll try to make sense out of them and give you some sort of a summary of the entire webinar. But if there is not anything else to add here, Brad, Jocelyn, I think we can conclude the webinar for the day. Any parting thoughts?
No, I just encourage everybody, part of the purpose of this was just to make everybody aware of some of the tools that different cities of different sizes and different areas of the country are utilizing. Don't assume that they are, beyond the budget. Many of them can be priced to fit. So I encourage everybody to kind of continue to explore and, try to implement technology, whether it's some of the things that Jocelyn mentioned or some of the things that Suhag and I showed. All of these things, can and should have an impact on the work that we do every day, helping us to effectively communicate proposals. So thank you all very much for your time today.
Thank you. Awesome.
All right. Jocelyn, any parting thoughts? Are you good?
Sure. like we discussed, you can start collecting your data now. We work with communities when they start knowing that they're going to be updating their zoning code. By the time they get the budget in line and all the ducks in a row, it can be years from knowing they want to update it to like securing the budget and all these things. So you can start sort of getting your data thinking through that now, because it probably will be some time before you get to there. And when you're structuring the RFPs for your comp plans, you're structuring the RFP for your zoning codes, think about these tools, think about integrating them, and think about the data that you want integrated. And you can utilize when you're paying for a consultant, think about what you want them to be doing. And if you want these analyses to be done as part of your comp plan so they inform your zoning code, start thinking about through these now. I always say the RFP is a really good thing to think through. They're difficult if you've not written them before, but you can definitely include these things in them to make sure you're getting the best approach to your code update. So that's all I have.
Well, thank you. We appreciate everyone's time. Thank you, Jocelyn. Thank you, Brad. Thank you, Bryce. Many of you stick around for 10 more minutes, so your time is greatly appreciated. We look forward to seeing you around in various different planning conferences. If not, looking forward to connecting with you or via email in the next few days. Y'all have a great day.
Thank you so much.